The road was long and bitterly quiet, stretching through the winter plains like a ribbon of gray beneath the pale sky. A wagon creaked along, its wheels carving ruts into the hard ground. Inside sat a young woman of 22, her hands clutched around a small satchel, as though it held the last remnants of her courage. Her coat was thin for the cold, and her bonnet framed a face too weary for her years, yet soft, carrying a trace of innocence that hardship had not stolen. She had been called many things in her short life: fragile, naive, foolish, but never brave. Yet bravery was all she had left now, carrying her westward toward a man she had never seen, a child she had not expected, and a future she could hardly picture without trembling. The advertisement had been brief, written in a neat, masculine script: widower seeks wife. Must be steady, kind. Frontier home, small child. The words had burned in her mind the moment she read them. Her father had frowned, her mother had sighed, and the women of her town had whispered with sharp tongues about what sort of girl sold herself across the miles. But desperation can make a woman swallow shame, and a lonely soul can gamble her last shred of hope on the chance of being wanted. She had packed her few belongings, pressed the paper against her heart, and answered. The ranch appeared suddenly at the end of the road, a modest structure of weathered wood standing against the vast sweep of land. Smoke curled from the chimney, a thin thread against the dimming sky. Fences framed the property, and a barn sagged at the edges like an old man's shoulders, though there was order in the way the tools leaned and the horses were tied. It was a place built by hands that did not falter, where silence had long been a companion. The wagon slowed, and her heart beat so loud she feared the driver could hear it. A man stepped from the porch. Broad-shouldered, tall, his frame carried the ease of someone accustomed to work that would break lesser men. His face was carved with angles, strong jaw dusted with stubble, eyes narrowed not in anger but in caution. He wore no smile, offered no charm, only studied her as if weighing what she might bring and what she might take away. This was the rancher, the man whose name she had spoken aloud in the privacy of her room, practicing the sound of it. Now he stood real before her, and she felt small as a shadow at dusk. He helped her down, his hand warm but brief against hers. No word of welcome passed his lips, only a polite nod. Yet his silence said more than words. It told of a man who had lived too long without laughter, who did not expect tenderness, who trusted no promise until it had endured. She lowered her gaze, heart sinking, wondering if she had made the gravest mistake of her life. Then she saw the child. A little girl no older than 6 peered from behind his leg, clutching the hem of his coat. Hair the color of pale wheat framed her face, and her eyes, wide, curious, aching with questions, fixed on the stranger who had arrived. The girl's smallness struck the young woman more deeply than the man's silence. Here was not judgment but hope, flickering timidly like a candle flame in a draught. Inside, the house was neat, every corner speaking of a man who lived by order rather than comfort. The table was scrubbed bare, shelves stacked with jars, the hearth clean but cold. She set her satchel down with trembling hands, every creak of the floorboard echoing her sense of trespass. The rancher introduced nothing, offered no explanations, only gestured to the chair as though he had forgotten how to speak to another adult in his home. The girl sat close to her father, still staring, as though trying to solve the riddle of this new presence. Supper was plain: bread, beans, a strip of meat. The bride picked at her plate, appetite knotted with nerves. The silence pressed heavier than the food. She longed to ask questions, but feared her voice would sound foolish in such stillness. The man ate without hurry, his eyes on his plate, yet she noticed the way he glanced at the child often, as though she were the only measure that mattered. That night, in the small room prepared for her, she sat on the edge of the bed and let the weight of her choice wash over her. The mattress sagged, the walls were bare, and the night pressed against the window with a hollow chill. She remembered the whispers of women back home, mocking her innocence, predicting her ruin. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps she had traded one cage for another, only this one far from all she had ever known. She buried her face in her hands and wept softly, careful not to be heard. The morning brought no gentler welcome. She rose early, determined to prove her worth. Yet her hands shook as she struggled with the unfamiliar stove, matches slipping from her fingers. The house was too quiet, the pressure of expectation too sharp. Her chest tightened until she feared she might break before she had even begun. It was then she felt a small presence beside her. The child had padded and barefoot, hair tousled from sleep, clutching a rag doll whose seams were frayed. She stared with solemn eyes at the stranger, trying so hard to coax flame from stubborn wood. The young woman froze, ashamed, afraid of seeming weak, before this small judge. But the girl stepped closer, voice barely more than a breath. "Can you be Mama?" The words fell like a stone into still water, rippling through the silence, reaching into the deepest part of her heart. She turned, meeting the child's gaze, and for a moment the world seemed to still around them. All the fear, all the loneliness she had carried across miles, trembled in her chest. The little girl's face held no guile, only need, only a fragile trust that this stranger might fill the emptiness left behind. At the doorway, unseen until then, the rancher stood. His expression did not soften into a smile, yet something shifted in his eyes, something quiet, unspoken, a flicker of possibility. He did not interrupt, did not chide the child. He simply stood, watching the way the bride's hands trembled, and then steadied as she reached out, not yet touching, but answering with her gaze alone. In that whisper, the house changed. The walls no longer seemed as cold, the silence no longer as sharp. Something had been planted, fragile as spring grass beneath melting snow. She did not know if it would grow, did not know if this man would ever open his guarded heart, did not know if she herself could bear the weight of such a role. But in the child's question she felt, for the first time in years, that someone saw her not as a mistake, not as a burden, but as a hope. She breathed deeply, steadied by the fragile thread binding them all together, and for the first time since stepping off the wagon, she dared to think she might not be entirely alone. The days stretched into weeks, marked not by great events, but by the slow stitching of routine, like threads pulling a torn garment back together. The young bride learned the rhythm of the ranch with hesitant steps, fumbling at first, then finding her place by degrees. She rose before dawn, kneading dough with hands still tender from softer living, and though her loaves were dense and uneven, the rancher's daughter ate them as if they were feasts. She fumbled with the milking, splashing more on her skirts than in the bucket, but laughter flickered once in the little girl's throat, quick and shy, as though the sound had been hiding. That laugh lingered longer in the house than the smell of bread or milk, and though the bride blushed at her clumsiness, she clung to that fragile proof that she was not failing entirely. The rancher watched from a distance, his manner unchanged, his voice measured, never sharp yet never warm enough to ease her fears. His silence pressed upon her like the wide western sky, endless, heavy, waiting for thunder that never came. Yet beneath it she began to glimpse something steady, not cruel, as she had once feared, but patient. He did not correct her harshly, did not mock her mistakes, only fixed what she left crooked, adjusted what she fumbled. His eyes lingered longer than his words, and though he did not smile, he did not look away either. The child, however, became her anchor. The girl followed her from room to room, watching her stir pots and patch clothes, her small hand often reaching for the hem of the woman's skirt. At night, when nightmares woke her, it was not always her father she sought but the gentle hum of the bride's lullaby, soft and unsteady though it was. Each time, the young woman's heart ached with the sweetness of being needed, yet trembled at the fear of failing. Still, doubt clung like a shadow. She remembered the voices of the women back home, their sneers about her weakness, her innocence, her foolishness in answering a stranger's call. Even here, among new soil, the echo of their laughter haunted her. When she caught her reflection in the wash basin, she did not see a wife or a mother, only a frightened girl trying to wear shoes too large. One afternoon, while gathering flour at the neighbor's homestead, she overheard words that cut deep. A sharp-tongued woman, leaning against her doorway, spoke low but clear enough, "That bride won't last. Too soft, too young. He needs a woman of grit, not a fragile doll." The words sank into her heart like stones into a river, pulling her down. She forced a smile, carried the sack home, but inside she felt the truth of it gnawing. That night, while the rancher repaired a fence in the wind's howl, she folded her dresses into her satchel, each fold heavy with defeat. But when she turned, he was there, shadow filling the doorway. His eyes flicked to the satchel, then to her face. Silence stretched between them, taut and painful. She forced the words out, her voice breaking. She was not enough, not strong enough, not the wife or mother they needed. She said she would leave before she failed them more deeply. His jaw tightened, his silence nearly crushed her. Then he stepped closer, voice low but firm, not polished, not poetic, just honest. He told her he had not sought strength in her hands, but gentleness in her spirit. He said his daughter's smile had returned since she arrived, and no storm could match the quiet he had endured before her presence. She froze, unable to answer, trembling at the weight of his confession. That very night the storm struck, fiercer than any they had known that winter. Wind screamed across the plains, rattling shutters, hurling dust and branches through the air. The sky boiled black, lightning flashing sharp against the land. Inside, the fire sputtered as the little girl clutched her doll. The rancher secured the barn, rain drenching him to the bone. The bride tried to comfort the child, but in a sudden gust the door flew wide, and the rag doll slipped from the girl's grasp, snatched by the wind. Crying out, the child chased it into the night before anyone could stop her. Terror cracked through the house louder than thunder. The rancher lunged for his coat, but the bride was already in the storm, skirts whipping, hair loose, heart pounding. The world was a blur of rain and darkness, every sound muffled by the roar of wind. She stumbled through mud, calling the girl's name until her voice shredded. At last she found her near the creek, clutching the doll in wet hands, tears streaming down her face. The child cried, "Mama, don't leave me," and the word pierced the bride like both wound and healing. She dropped to her knees, gathering the girl against her chest, shielding her with her own body as the storm lashed around them. The rancher reached them moments later, his face pale with fear, relief flooding his eyes as he saw them safe. In that wild instant, something unspoken passed between them, his daughter clinging to the woman, calling her mother, the woman cradling her as if she had been born to it, and the man seeing not just survival but a promise fulfilled. He reached out, his hand firm on the bride's shoulder, grounding them all as the storm raged. They returned soaked, shivering, but alive. The fire was coaxed back to life, warmth spreading through the small room. The girl curled against the bride, refusing to let go. The rancher sat across the hearth, his silence different now, no longer guarded but vulnerable, carrying weight and meaning. He spoke softly, telling her he did not want her to leave, not as a caretaker, not as a guest, but as his wife in truth, as heart to his home, as mother to his child. His words were halting, yet they rang with the steadiness of a man who spoke only what he meant. Tears slipped down her face, not of fear this time, but of release. She had traveled miles to find a place she feared would never exist for her, and now here it was, offered not from duty but from need, not from desperation but from choice. She placed her hand in his, her voice trembling, as she said she would stay. The storm eased before dawn, leaving the land washed clean. The fences still stood, the barn still held, and within the house a fragile, precious thing had taken root. The girls slept soundly at last, the rancher's hand still closed around the bride's. Outside, the plains stretched endless and wide, but inside, the silence no longer weighed heavy. It was filled instead with the quiet strength of belonging. And perhaps in the hush that follows every storm, the old truth could be heard, that love does not always come in thunder or lightning, but in whispers, in hands reaching across silence, in a child's question that becomes an answer. The innocent bride who once trembled with fear now felt the warmth of a home she had not thought possible, and in that warmth, the promise of a future waiting to be lived. Subscribe now to join the campfire and never miss another heartfelt Wild West tale.